Hi, for those of you that do not know me, my name is Jennie Lawson, and I'm the creator of Mimosa Beauty and Mimosa Sanctuary. Now, I have business coaching with Rachel Sampson, who I'm about to who's about to interview me actually, because when I was coming up with topics for the year 2 of the Sanctuary membership, one of the ones that she suggested was leadership, and the words that came out of my mouth were, I don't really know, or I don't really see myself as a leader. And so what I wanted was for us to dig into that topic a little bit more, and her questions really are insightful, so please keep watching and you will get to see our whole conversation.
Hey Jenny, how are you?
Good, thank you.
So today we are talking about leadership.
Okay, and you have some questions for me.
Yeah, I do. So what helped you to shape your opinions about leadership?
Do you know what the etymology of the word leadership is, by the way? Just side note.
Okay.
No.
The action of leading a group of people or an organisation. Or the state or position of being a leader.
See, for me, I think leadership comes in multiple forms and facets. Because I think that, like I said, that I wouldn't have put myself down as a leader necessarily, because now I don't have a team. Whereas at the time, I struggled with leadership so much because I was focusing on myself isn't the right answer, but because I was so self-aware that I knew what I needed and what I wanted for my company. It was then quite difficult I had an idea of how I thought I wanted to lead, but that wasn't necessarily the way that other people needed my leadership to be. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, keep going. Yes, and
I think sometimes the more you read about leadership, the worse it gets, because the more you learn how everybody else perceives leadership, you subconsciously try and change your own opinion and view of how you should be a leader. Whereas for me, it was very much, this is me, this is what I believe, this is how I want my company to be, and this is the path that I want us to go down. So you're either with me or you're not.
Okay, so I've got 2 questions that I want to ask you. So I'm going to have to, they're quite big ones, so I'm going to loop back to them.
Go on.
But if we take the quote from Brené Brown, where she describes authenticity as the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are, then I want to ask you, so does that mean that you were being authentic in your leadership style, or were you showing up as who you thought you should be?
(50-50) Because I don't think I know how to not be authentic in it.
Okay, tell me more.
As in, I don't know how to be anybody else. And yet, I think because, especially within the industry that I'm in, I'm so particular. So particular, because I think the difference in terms of leadership in an office, for example, is that you're in an environment where you can see everybody and everybody's energies in that room. So that room is now a rainbow that is continuously coloured, and the colours continuously changing, but that energy is felt by everyone. Whereas in beauty, you're all in individual rooms, which means your own little colour, and you then come out and blast people with your colour, and then you go back into your little hole. And I think sometimes that was that was the hardest thing, is trying to lead and manage a team when you're all in your own individual holes, because you're in your individual rooms. You have no idea what's going on anywhere else. And so that was, I think, a really difficult part of leadership within the industry, because you have all these ideas of how you think you want to lead your team, and yet you've got no clue what they're doing, which is a control freak aspect, and you have to have immense amounts of trust. But I think it is also a difficult aspect of leadership, because I was, particularly from an authentic point of view, exactly how I believed was right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
I think it is right to call people out on what they're doing wrong. And I do believe that it's right to particularly for clients, to see what's important, and what's important to your brand, and what's important to your ethos, and what's important to your leadership, that you don't agree with the fact that actually that hasn't been written properly, or that the books need to be in color order, or the things that actually are important to be done for the maintenance of something to be as flawless as it is, whether it's award-winning or not. Because it's about everything. It's about the fact that it needs to not have any dust on it, because that's not clean. It's about the fact the door handles need to be wiped down. It's everything. It's all the minutiae detail that to somebody walking in might not necessarily see it, but to people, or the people living in it, don't necessarily see it, because it's just part of the surroundings. Whereas for somebody new, they pick up on those kind of things.
So what do you think are the unspoken assumptions about leadership following on from that, and both positive and negative? Because you've talked about what's happening there behind closed doors. You've talked about what what your team are doing that you don't know, and you don't know what they're doing. They don't know what you're doing, and actually, then you've taken it, out into the whole industry. So you're reflective of a whole industry here. So, what are the unspoken assumptions from both you and your team?
I think the unspoken thing about leadership is people assume you know what you're doing. And I think the most authentic thing is, I got that wrong, and I put my hands up. Like, I shouldn't have done that, or this was wrong, or we did this wrong, and that was my error. Because it was, and also I think the other thing about leadership that is unspoken is the fact that everything lands on you. So although you might be in it as a team, you might be in it as a group, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. You are the one that has to make the final yes or no. You're the one that responsibility 6 months down the line, the fact that you said yes to something, it's got nothing to do with the people that are or are not still on your team. It's you. You're the person that agreed to something, so therefore you're the one that has to carry it out. Example, putting money on account. We had someone put money on account at Christmas, and I said, are we 100% sure we're going to still be here in June? I was overruled massively. And then the pandemic hit in March, and we've got 760 quid on account that I've got to pay back to a client. But it's got nothing to do with the other girls. And yet that was my responsibility, because I said yes, even though my instinct told me to say no.
Okay. So now we bring instinct in as well as authenticity.
Yeah. I'm going to put this up because it's too long. And as a positive, I think a positive about leadership is can I find a positive thing about leadership? I think the respect, but not from a commanding point of view, from an acknowledgement point of view. That actually you've got to that position through choice, through decisions and actions that you've made over the course of that time period to get you to where you are. Mm-hmm. So there is some accountability and some respect that's due on that as well.
Okay, so if we take the kind of model of, that we can go on to pause, which gives us time to, excuse me, reflect and start. And during a pandemic, when we are experiencing, change so fast, and as some say, we're experiencing decades of change in days, can we actually can we put ourselves onto pause and reflect and say, what new activities or behaviours should we start?
Yes, I think we can. And I think not only can we put ourselves on pause, we have to put ourselves on pause.
Mm-hmm.
Even if that's at 3 o'clock in the morning, you put yourself on pause and you turn everything off. And you say, actually, I need an hour of just, you just have to go inwards. We have to stop. Now, the pandemic was the perfect evidence of we need to stop. And we need to take time, not only to think about leadership itself, but time to actually think about you and what you're serving and what your purpose is. And the purpose of the greater good. Because I think, especially with Sir David Attenborough, the one thing that we should have all noticed is that we are so greedy as people, and we're so all-consuming, and we are so full of greed, overnight greed. And actually to stop and go, actually, do I really need all this stuff? When you can't actually go to the shops, do you really need it? And I think within business, deciding what actually serves you. Would I have stopped? Would I have made the decisions that were forced on me within 3 days of closure? No. Would I have fought until I was sand on the ground? Yes. Would I have fought for what I believed in? Yes. Mm-hmm. Would I change it now? No. Not for a minute. And I think that's what it's shown everybody. It's shown us that we can work from home, we can work online, we don't need to fly around the world for a meeting to get a piece of paperwork signed. When you physically can't do it, you can get it very, very easily done over Zoom or online. Do we need to stop and really evaluate what's happening in our businesses? Yes, 100%.
And so what I think is really interesting that you've just raised there as well is the relationship. Well, you've kind of touched on competition in the marketplace. I'm reading into the middle of what you've said.
Competition in what sense?
I want to ask that question, and the relationship, therefore, between competition and leadership, and how has being in a pandemic changed that?
I think it's very different from my industry.
Different to what?
I think it's different for our industry as a whole because we physically weren't allowed to work. So we had to be not necessarily competitive, because I don't think competitive is the right word. We had to pivot.
Okay.
And if you weren't prepared to pivot, or weren't, I would argue, intelligent enough to pivot, or entrepreneurial enough to pivot, you weren't going to survive. Which is brutal. But I think that's fair.
And so then how do you make the connection between the ability to adapt and pivot and leadership? Is there a direct relationship?
It's courage and bravery.
Okay, nice.
Brené Brown.
Yeah, tell me more.
But no, because I think that, and yeah, okay, there is within corporate. If the companies that weren't, like, you had to pivot, every single company had to pivot, every single person had to be able to create an infrastructure where their members of staff could work from home. has that benefited everybody? Not necessarily. Has it benefited women? Most certainly not. Yes and no. Because I speak to people at work who have had to give up their job because of childcare because of the pandemic. So although at the beginning I was very much of this is the rise of women, because women can work from home and be a wife and be a mother and still do their job, which 90% of people can, but a lot of people can't without breaking. And we as us were in an extremely privileged position where we didn't have small children, because otherwise we would have gone mad, especially with a Christian teaching piano downstairs and me working from my bedroom. It's physically impossible. You couldn't have done it with a toddler running around or a newborn baby and sleep deprived. And we are extremely privileged in that. But I think from companies and watching from people that I've seen back at the salon, from companies that are prepared to let you back into the office because they have gone above and beyond and made it COVID compliant. And if you're struggling for mental health, or if you need to get out of your house, you can come back to work because we've done everything within our power to make it better, but it's your choice. As opposed to the companies that I've heard that have said you have to come back to work by this date. And then the government flips it on its head and 3 weeks later they're expected to work from home again. I don't think there's the consistency within, and this is extremely stereotypical, within senior male leadership, because I don't think it's acknowledged. I don't think it's heard. And when you speak to the women that are at home, they are feeding their children, homeschooling their children, feeding their husbands, being a wife, on top of their own job. But then that I would argue that's leadership at home as much as leadership in the workplace.
So you're talking about different styles of leadership.
Yeah.
And what are you suggesting?
Systems and boundaries.
Yeah, tell me more.
I had someone say to me the other day at work that one of her friends had just had a baby, and she was like, set the boundaries now. Set the boundaries of what is acceptable at home now. Because if you think it's bad now, it's only ever going to get worse. You set the boundaries about who does bedtime, who does this, who does that. You have your list of jobs and each does each thing. Someone's cooking dinner on 3 days of the week, the other person cooks dinner on this days of the week, and you stick to it like glue, because otherwise you lose your boundaries. And it was really interesting to hear, because I was like, yeah, all right. But actually, when you sit and you think about it, no, that is right. But do we do that in workplace? Not really. We do, but it's not down to necessarily, I would say it's not necessarily down to volunteering. It's down to being allocated that is your job, therefore you do it. Not, I opt to sweep the leaves on a Tuesday and a Thursday morning.
So is that participatory leadership that you're talking about there?
Yeah. Which is quite hard to manage, because it involves...
So it's hard to manage, but...
It's hard to manage because it involves self-accountability. But if I had my time again, that's probably how I would try and manage a team.
Okay, so let's just think, can you tell me what skills do you think are needed for that?
I think every person within an organization of which has leadership like that, I was about to try and say participatory, but I can't say it. Participating leadership. We've got a couple of words that I can't say, which Christian Bart is hilarious. I think within an environment like that, everybody needs to be authentic. And that doesn't mean you portray how you feel people want you to be. It's actually, I don't do mornings, therefore I'm not taking that job. I can't be at work half an hour early because I don't get up in the morning. But I will stay late and I'll do the things that need to be done at the end of the day. And would I say that's authenticity? Not necessarily. Would I say it's accountability? Maybe. I'd be more inclined to call it self-awareness, which I think a lot of people don't have.
So what you're doing is saying that you're bringing the aspects of yourself, whether they be strengths or weaknesses, into the decision-making process. So you're not using them as excuses, but
you're using them as massive skill assets.
Yeah. And that's the authentic part.
Yeah.
You don't like getting up in the morning. So as long as who you're participating with can accept that, then you can find something together that works.
Yeah. But I think you also need to be aware of yourself enough to acknowledge that that's a thing. Because can people really honestly, hand on heart, say that they know themselves well enough to acknowledge that that's a thing?
Well, I think that's a good question. So then, because I wanted to ask you how you consider your perspective to be different to the mainstream point of view. Do you think there is a mainstream point of view?
As someone who has never worked in that industry, yes, I would say there's a corporate point of view. I've worked in it from a degree point of, like, from a certain level, but not within a corporate office job industry. But yes, from what I hear, which can always be diluted or highlighted, then yes, I would say there's a corporate concept of leadership, as opposed to the small business independent form of leadership. And I also think the biggest thing about leadership is you can try your hardest and you're not going to get it right every time.
I like this, where you're coming from here, because this is one of these unspoken assumptions, maybe.
Yeah.
It is what you're saying, that the mainstream view is of corporate leadership, and then we all try and take that out to our own worlds and our own small businesses,
and wonder why it doesn't work. Yeah, because actually people aren't just a number, are they? They're a person, they're a human being with emotions and feelings. And it was one of the things that I tried to do really early on with the salon, was that if the girls were having a bad day, they had to say they were having a bad day. Like, I feel shit today. I'm tired, I'm grumpy, I'm angry, I'm horrible. It's like, great, okay, we'll avoid you like the plague. But if you don't acknowledge, and it's really hard because people just stomp around. If you don't acknowledge what's wrong, and if you just say, no, I'm fine, no one can help you. And without other people's help, you're not the path isn't going to get any easier.
Is that another example of being authentic? Is bringing truth?
Yeah.
So that's in your leadership toolkit?
Yes, I would say so. As well as being brave enough to be prepared to get it wrong. Because it's not easy. And I think, having sat on a couple of webinars this week and actually listening to people who say setting up memberships isn't easy, it's never easy. And it was so reassuring to hear that, because I think what we see from the outside is success in whatever form that comes in, whether it's a big building, whether it's monetary value, whether it's a big team, whether it's whatever you see, whether if it's you're paying for something that's a lot of money in your world, so therefore it must equal a lot of money in their world. And I think that's where the perception's wrong. Because what it looks like isn't always how it feels as well. And it might look really flawless. Like, our emails might look really flawlessly written, but they're not written by me. They're scribed by me, they're audio content by me, they haven't been written by me. So yes, it's my brain translated into an email. Can I take full credit for it? I don't believe so. But to everybody else, it looks like it's perfect. Our social media is perfect. Our emails are perfect. Our marketing campaign is perfect.
So is this another example of participatory leadership?
Yes, I guess.
With everybody leading in their part, the bit that they're good at, the bit that has their strength.
Yeah. And also asking for help. That's the biggest part of being a leader, isn't it? Asking at the point that actually I need help in this. I can't do this on my own anymore.
And when we come back to that bit about it being easy or not easy, so are you saying that it's okay for it not to be easy?
Yes.
And can you tell us why you believe that?
See, I know that Lisa Turner would say if it's not easy, there's something wrong. Why do I think it's not easy? I think because you're dealing with human beings, you're not dealing with machines. And human beings are completely and utterly out of your control. You can't control how they think, how they feel, how they perceive you, how they perceive your life or what you have. You can try and change the tone of your voice so that it sounds the way to you that you think it comes across to them, but that's not always right. There are so many different things that you cannot control about how someone looks at you. Because they can look at you and think that you're okay, whereas actually inside you're broken. But that's their perception and you can't control that. So how is it easy? If you're human in your leadership, it's not easy.
So what's the benefit of putting yourself in that place where it is uncomfortable, where it's not easy? What's the benefit to you as a leader?
What was the benefit? See, but this is how this thing came up, wasn't it? Because I said I didn't believe that I was a leader. Now that I'm solo, again, what's the benefit? I think that people see your truth, and then they make the decision as to whether they want to join your tribe or not.
And that's another layer of authenticity.
Yeah, because it's a bit like buying a tub of golden syrup thinking that you're going to make ginger biscuits with it, and you find out it's actually got Marmite inside it, and that's not what you bought.
Yeah.
Because you can't make ginger biscuits with Marmite in them.
Because then they'd be Marmite biscuits.
Yeah, but they're not going to stay. But I think that's the difference between authenticity, isn't it? Because actually you want to be, especially online and in the online world, I'd want to meet you for a coffee and you'd be the same person that I saw on your webinar or watching your interview or listening on a podcast. I wouldn't, if I met you for coffee after listening to something and you were an absolute bitch, I wouldn't. You've lost your own authenticity. You've lost any respect that I had for you. And I think that's the difference in this world post-pandemic, is that there is no point trying to be something you're not, because people can see through it even faster. Because if you let that slip just for a minute, it's recorded. It's all there.
Some more examples of the activities in your day-to-day work that involve leadership. And in that, we're bearing in mind that in the beauty industry, you've had the biggest lockdowns of all. You've had the longest lockdown, so you've had a lot of change. So what can you tell us about how you've used your leadership skills day to day in the activities that you've been working with?
I think choosing what path to go down, choosing what is right for you and for your people. So for me personally, the first week of the pandemic was the worst week ever. Having to make an entire team redundant and potentially lose everything I'd worked for the last 9 years. And having to come to terms with that, not on my own, because obviously I have an entire team of people that support me outside of my employees. But I think from that point of leadership, I asked for help. I called every single person that I could think of that could help me find a solution through, and advice. But with a caveat that I asked people's opinions. I didn't ask everyone's opinion. I didn't put it out on Facebook asking, hey, do you think if I make my team redundant, it's going to be better to do it now or wait until I'm bankrupt and then they get nothing? Because in my version of my leadership, what was authentic to me was that my girls got paid rather than being at a risk of bankruptcy, which is where we were. We were at a risk of bankruptcy and liquidation where we were going to have no money, which meant that if we went bankrupt or liquidated, the girls got nothing. And so I believe I took the high road and went, okay, well, fine, let's burn we give them all the money I've got, make them redundant, send them off in an authentic way and what I would want done to me. I know salons that have closed, not in the pandemic, just previously, that the girls found out their business that the salon had closed by turning up to work and the doors being locked. And I didn't want that. I didn't want that for my girls. Because at the end of the day, they were my family. They were my team. They were a team that I believed that I had helped and raised and developed through the industry. And I didn't want that for them. I also didn't want them to face the pandemic with no money, which I think is fair. And then moving through that, I think from a leadership point of view, I did stuff online. So I did webinars, but I waited until everybody else had stopped making so much noise because that didn't serve anybody. Me adding to everybody else's shit didn't serve anyone. Me adding sound bites once we'd already got through a month. And okay, so we've survived the first 4 weeks of this. Let's try and find some grounding rituals that can help us through the next God knows how long. I also didn't bombard people with emails, but I kept them up to date, not from a sales point of view. So when I announced that the girls had been made redundant in June, and I waited that long purely because I didn't believe it served anybody's purpose to do it before then. Because there was no point, I believe there was no point telling anybody before that, because if people thought I was wrong, I was going to lose them anyway. And why lose them earlier when what I was putting out online in terms of webinars and at-home facial kits served every single person in my database. It served all of them. And I needed to wait until we knew at least a form of date, or until the point, which is what had happened, that it was being compromised. Which it was.
Yeah, is that
that's a very nice way of saying it, isn't it? It was being compromised.
But what I hear is that decision making and compassion have been key to your leadership style in your day-to-day during this pandemic. Are those words that you would use, decision making and compassion, or have you got other words that you would prefer to use?
No, I think they're good words. I think as a leader, you have to make decisions. You have to, but that's the thing. Like I said at the beginning, the buck stops with you.
And so then if we apply that same principle of, do the pause and reflect, you look back to what the decisions that you made at that point, would you have done things differently?
No. No, not at all.
And so
I'm going to think on that for 10 seconds more. Would I
okay,
have done anything differently? No, I don't think so. I think I wish I'd been less terrified of telling people that the girls have been made redundant. And I don't know if that's entirely fair. I wasn't terrified, I was worried. I was worried about the backlash, which I did get a backlash. I wish I'd been more honest in the severity of the situation that I was in.
okay.
Because I think
back to there being some unspoken assumptions.
yeah, because I think people assume that
you had and that clients had, that your industry,
yeah,
that your
I
team.
think people had no idea that I was having conversations with liquidators. And I think people were shocked when I told them, and I didn't tell them lightly. It was very much that conversation came up in salon in person, and people were shocked. It wasn't the kind of thing I think I did put it in the email, just that we were not in the financial situation to be able to maintain. And I also think that there are many criticisms that many people have about the government and about knowledge and data and everything that has happened during this period. But I think the one thing that I struggled with the most was the fact that people assumed that the money was given. That people assumed that because you had a business, therefore you got money, therefore you were okay. And that's not what happens. And it's not what happened. And I waited 10 weeks to get money, which is why the girls were made redundant, because I found that out day 2. So I had 48 hours to make a decision, because if I'd waited any longer up until payday, I would have been bankrupt anyway. And there were technicalities, and I did have to be really ruthless, but they were decisions that I still wouldn't, they were decisions that had to be made to make sure the survival of Mimosa in a form that was suitable to be able to carry it through a pandemic. Because I would have lost everything. Like, we're not just talking, oh, you close it, which I assumed you just close the name and you reopen it under another limited company. That's not what happens. They take everything you own. They take your books, your couches, they pull up your laminate flooring, they take your computer, they take your till, they take your washing machine, your $4,000 autoclave, they take your 10 grand microjet, they take everything you own, everything that you've ever run through your accounts vanishes.
Okay, so there's 2 more things going into your toolbox that I hear. One is risk and the other one's communication.
Yeah. And I wish I communicated it more. I didn't want a sob story. I didn't want a pity party, because I was grounded enough in the decisions that I'd made and I was still standing. And I don't agree with pity partying, because I don't want your pity.
So what's the opposite end to pity party?
I want to say grounded in certainty.
Well, thank you for showing up with such vulnerability over those decisions.
Thanks.
So difficult. What kind of activity? No, what excites?
This is our last question.
No, what excites you about the potential for new styles of leadership in the future, as we now head into, 2021 and whatever that brings for us?
I hope that it brings more courage to business. I hope it brings more. I think people get left behind, and I think And I also think, which is again extremely judgmental, I think the younger generation aren't pulling their weight and haven't learned how to be accountable. And I think that a new style of leadership needs to happen where everybody participates in it, because otherwise they're never going to learn. They're not going to learn that it's not given to you on a gold plate with fairy dust on it that you sniff up your nose. It doesn't work like that. Business doesn't work like that. Work doesn't work like that. Money doesn't work like that. And it's not your right to have it. You earn the right. You earn the right to be loved by making sure that you are whole as a human being. You earn the right to a home by earning enough money to have it. It's not given freely. And it shouldn't be expected to be. I also hope it changes work for women. I really do. I hope it changes work so that women can work from home flexibly. Because you don't need to be at the office. But I also do believe that the pandemic has had a massive effect on people's mental health. And I think there is a place for people coming together, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in the form that it was before. I think that people need to come together for camaraderie, whatever word you want to use, to actually be together energetically as an energy of feeding that rainbow, rather than everybody being stuck on their own. I think a lot of people took that for granted. The fact that they could just go out for lunch or have a one-to-one in a coffee shop because it gets you out if you're having a really bad day. I think that's all been taken for granted. And managers are the ones that are struggling because they're not being looked after by their leaders, and yet they are leaders for their team, and yet no one's looking after them. And they're not in an environment that they're used to either, because they used to be able to have their own toolkit that they use to be able to do one-to-ones or to help their team that were struggling, or take them out, or chuck you all in a meeting room and do a big whiteboard on the wall. Everything's changed, and not necessarily for the better, but there has to be a happy medium. It's my 2 pence as someone who doesn't work in that environment.
What would you like people to take away from this?
Oh, that's a good question. To know that it's not always easy. And that the right decisions aren't always the easy decisions. Because you've either got, there is a quote somewhere, you can either take the easy option or you can take the right option. And the right one might not necessarily be what is right for other people, but it's the right one for you and your business potentially. And it's really hard. It's really hard to look at. It's hard to look at and go, actually, do you know what? This isn't serving me anymore. And it doesn't matter how hard you fought for it, you're going to have to walk away at some point. And I think the pandemic served a lot of people that, I hate to say it, Willy Wonka ticket. I know a lot of people who have all been in the same situation. But I also on that believe that there is a path that is written that success looks like. And if I could tell my 23-year-old self that now, would I listen? Probably not. Would I listen at all to say, look, where you are right now, you've got it really good. You've got more money than you can think of. You've got everything you could possibly want in the entire world other than a man. Like, come on. Would I listen? I don't think so, because I also think you have to earn those scars. People told me managing was hard. People told me a team is the hardest thing you will ever do, and I didn't listen, because I thought I would do it better than them, because I was different and I'm unique and I'm a different human being, and I know myself well enough that I can do this. And I still ended up on my face God knows how many times. But I think that's where you just put your hand up for it.
And so your advice to your younger self is what?
I don't know. I don't know if I would want to change what's happened, because I wouldn't be where I am. And I don't think that I could have the life I have now guaranteed if I hadn't have gone through the shit I'd gone through. And would I really want that? I was very different. I feel like most certainly the pandemic has humbled me. I think I was so focused and driven. And actually, when you have your knees cut off and the rug pulled out from under your feet and you land completely on your face in a whole pile of mud, it really makes you rethink what success looks like. Because not only is and we've seen it with all of them, we've seen it with all the massive companies, especially the hotels. The more you have, the more you've got to lose. And the more it hurts when you lose it.
And so, reflecting on this, is it helpful to talk about leadership styles?
Yeah, 100%.
And how would you now summarize what we've just talked about?
I don't know, I'm going to throw that back to you. How would you summarize it?
Well, I see that what you've done is you've created a toolkit that you've built this year.
I would argue that you've written a toolkit out of everything I've said.
I have. And I would also say that...
Which is how my team works.
The place of it not being easy is your growing edge.
Yeah.
And growth isn't always easy, is it? Sometimes.
No, it hurts.
Sometimes we get it wrong. And that we've got such a strong need right now for growth. And that takes courage when everything looks so uncertain. That's how I would sum it up. And actually the need for participatory leadership.
Yeah.
If we can do that, we meet the needs of lots of people.
But you've got to have a team that are prepared to do it. Which isn't always easy to find.
No.
So it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah. Because then you get back into that conversation about, well, do you compromise or do you stick to what your needs are?
Well, yeah, but then you're in a...
Your wants and needs are, and you hold out to get them met. You're not compromising, and then you catch the time later.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can just start by saying, right, hi Jenny. So today we're talking about leadership.
Yeah, good. Can you just say that one more time?
Hey, that's saying that you are a leader. I want to know, do you own being a leader?
Yes, I think I just had to look at it from a different way. Because I think leadership has a cage that if you don't fit the type, if you're not the prototype of a leader, therefore you are not one. Whereas actually that's not how it is.
So is the pandemic helping to break down that cage, to open the door?
I'd hope so. One would hope, wouldn't one?
One would. I'm with you.
Hopefully more people will talk about it.
And hopefully you'll be inspiring people to talk about it.
Yeah.
Is it that thing that in the mainstream people see leadership as something for somebody else?
Yeah, rather than something we all have.
Do you think there's people out there who haven't stepped into their leadership but have some kind of burning desire to do that?
Oh, there's a quote from Harry Potter there. Where is that? The ones that are, is it power or leadership? What does he say? I think the ones that have leadership thrust upon them realise they take up the mantle better than the ones that seek it. I think there is also a rise for introvert leadership, because now, especially in the pandemic, it has shown the introverts and the extroverts. Because if you're an introvert, you are happy as a pig in shit at home, whereas the extroverts are clawing at the wall.
And as an introvert, are you more or less able, or is it not a thing at all, to be able to read body language online?
More.
So you're more predisposed to be able to work.
Yeah, you can register it instantly. You can see in someone's face when they've gone. But then maybe that's just because I work with people. I think one thing I've realised and I think a lot of people have potentially subconsciously, is now that we're all hidden from here, that movement is the most important movement your face can have. And if you have had Botox, it will massively affect your relationships with people outside of your home if you're in a mask, because they will not be able to see. Because if your face doesn't move and you just do this and you talk like this, they're not going to know at all whether you're thinking anything or if you're happy or if you're sad, because they can't see this. They can just see the fact that they're, yes, well, you obviously you're I'm trying really hard not to move my eyebrows now, but I think that's a huge thing, that if you haven't got these micro movements where the lines on your eyes, your eyebrow movement, if you haven't got them, it's going to massively impact.
That's a change in values there then, isn't it?
Because actually our values now, it shouldn't be about looks, it should be about communication and connection. And you need to be able to connect with people through your eyes now.
Is that another route leading back to authenticity?
Oh yeah, but that should have been like that anyway. You know what I think about Botox. But it's there as a smoother, it doesn't need to be there to paralyze you. People need to be able to see what you're thinking. They need to be able to see your brain working. Because otherwise you're just blank and you might have just absorbed what they said and take it completely as, yeah, well, I think that's rubbish. Whereas if you're like, actually, with that tiny little move that you're thinking and you have acknowledged what they've said and you've heard them, that's the difference.
And that's what we're looking for, particularly when we're working in groups online, where we actually don't know who we've got eye contact with. To be able to pick up those micro movements is really
It's critical. Yeah. Which is why you should always be looking at the camera.